Guardian of the Rising Phoenix recently left me a thoughtful and very multi-layered question about reincarnation on my video about starseeds. I want to start by reading it out loud because it opens exactly the conversation I've been wanting to have today. The question was, if many spiritual paths and religions believe in reincarnation, is a soul bound to one place? Is a soul bound only to one planet, or could it have originated somewhere else in the universe? And could a human soul reincarnate into an animal and vice versa? This is a big question, not only because it crosses religious boundaries, but because it touches psychology, philosophy, and how we define consciousness in the first place. And when we talk about reincarnation, people often assume there's one shared meaning behind the word. But the truth is that every tradition uses the same word for very different ideas. Some talk about reincarnation in a literal, structured way. Some talk about rebirth as a flow of conditions rather than of soul. Some traditions treat the idea symbolically. Some forbid reincarnation entirely. And modern spiritual spaces often mix all of these frameworks together in a way that were never historically connected. And that's why I want to look at each system separately before exploring my own perspective. Let's start with Hinduism, because it's one of the most commonly referenced systems in conversations about reincarnation. Historically, Hinduism is not a single unified religion, but a family of philosophies, practices, and regional traditions that developed over thousands of years on the Indian subcontinent. Early ideas appear in the Vedic period, where ritual, cosmic order, and continuity of life were emphasized. A major shift came up with the Upanishads, roughly 800 to 300 before Christus, which introduced the deeper metaphysical concept of Atman, the eternal self, and Brahman, the universal consciousness. These texts shaped much of what later schools of Hindu thought would debate, refine, or interpret differently. What's important to understand is that Hinduism isn't monolithic. Different philosophical schools within Hinduism interpret the nature of the soul and reincarnation in distinct ways. Advaita Vedanta teaches non-duality. Atman, the true self, is identical with Brahman, the absolute reality. Reincarnation happens only as long as we identify with ego and form. Dvaita Vedanta teaches dualism. The individual soul and the divine are internally separate. Reincarnation is real and ongoing, and liberation comes through devotion to God. Samkhya distinguishes between Purusha, the consciousness, and Prakriti, matter, and describes rebirth as the soul's involvement with the material world due to ignorance. Yoga philosophy adds a psychological and practical dimension, describing how impressions and attachments, samskaras, drive through cycles of rebirth until liberation. Despite these differences, most Hindu schools agree on a few core points. The soul, Atman, is eternal and not limited by the body or personality. Reincarnation is driven by karma, understood as natural cause and effect rather than moral punishment. Souls can appear in many life forms, including animals, without implying a hierarchy of worth. The universe is composed of multiple planes or realms, meaning the soul is not bound to Earth. The soul's origin is not planetary. It emerges from the same universal source as everything else. What modern interpretations sometimes get wrong is treating Hindu reincarnation as a linear ladder where humans are better than animals. That's not accurate in the philosophical texts. In many Hindu schools, the distinction between species is simply the distinction of experience, not spiritual value. This non-hierarchical framing is one of the places where my personal view aligns with Hindu thought. Consciousness is part of a larger whole, not something limited to biology or a single lifetime. Now let's move to Buddhism, where approaches which approaches things differently. Buddhism emerged in the 5th century BC in northern India as a response to certain Vedic ideas. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, questioned the nature of suffering, identity, and rebirth. Instead of accepting an eternal soul, Buddhism teaches that everything, including the sense of self, is impermanent. The self is understood as a collection of changing components rather than a fixed entity. Rebirth happens through the continuation of cause and conditions, not through a permanent soul migrating between bodies. In this view, human experience can lead to rebirth in animal, hell, or heavenly realms, depending on mental habits and attachments. I have a lot of respect for this model, but I don't personally agree with the part that denies any continuity of the deeper self. For me, there is at last something that carries through, a thread of awareness, so to say. Jainism deserves more attention because it's one of the most detailed and distinguished systems regarding reincarnation, and most people outside India know very little about it. Jainism is an ancient religion originating around the same general period as early Buddhism, and it's not a branch of Hinduism. It developed its own independent philosophy, scriptures, practices, and spiritual goals. While Hinduism has many schools of thought, Jainism is far more unified and structured in how it explains the soul and rebirth. In Jainism, the soul, jiva, is eternal, individual, and inherently pure. Unlike Hinduism, where karma is metaphorical or moral cause and effect, Jainism treats karma as a literal physical substance that sticks to the soul based on thoughts, emotions, and actions. This karmic matter weights the soul down and it keeps us bound to the cycle of rebirth. Liberation comes from removing that karmic residue through strict nonviolence, truthfulness, discipline, meditation, and ethical living. Jain reincarnation includes a huge range of forms: human lives, animal lives, celestial beings, plant life, microscopic life, and various hell realms. Souls are not bound to Earth and do not have a single point of origin. They simply exist eternally and move through different realms based on the accumulation of or shedding of karma. This makes Jainism very different from Hinduism. There is no creator god, no divine intervention, no caste system, no emphasis on devoting to a deity. Everything depends on the soul's own actions and the karmic particles it attracts or removes, which is why it stands out in conversations about reincarnation, right? Christianity, of course, takes a different position entirely. Christianity arose in the 1st century with CE within the context of Judaism and the Greco-Roman world. Jewish belief at the time focused on resurrection rather than reincarnation, and early Christian communities inherited this worldview. As Christian doctrine formed in the first few centuries, church councils debated ideas like the pre-existence of the soul, and early theologians such as Origen discussed concepts that sound similar to reincarnation, but by the 6th century the church formally rejected these views and solidified the one life, one death doctrine. Gnosticism adds another perspective. Historically, Gnosticism refers to a diverse set of spiritual movements that emerged in the 1st and 2nd century CE, around the same period as early Christianity. These groups blended elements of Judaism, Hellenistic philosophy, mysticism, and early Christian ideas. Gnostic texts, many of which were discovered in the Nag Hammadi library in 1945, described a cosmology where souls originate from a higher divine realm and become trapped in the material world. This historical context shows why Gnostic beliefs differ so sharply from mainstream Christian doctrine. They developed in parallel, not as a unified tradition. Gnostic traditions teach that the soul originates from the higher divine realm, the Pleroma, that the material world is a place of forgetting or entrapment. The goal is not endless rebirth, but awakening and returning to the divine source through inner knowledge. Some Gnostic groups thought limited soul cycles, while others rejected the idea entirely, treating reincarnation as a mechanism of entrapment rather than growth. And across these variations, the key theme is that the soul's origin is understood as non-physical rather than earthly. And witchcraft and pagan traditions are not unified about reincarnation, and understanding the historical background here also helps explain why. What we now call witchcraft is not a single religion, but a broad set of practices that developed differently across cultures. In Europe, pre-Christian folk beliefs varied by region and were tied to land spirits, ancestors, seasonal cycles. These beliefs survived in fragments through folklore, herbalism, household magic. Because these were rooted in local customs rather than centralized doctrine, reincarnation, where it appeared, was understood in a flexible and symbolic way. In kitchen or hearth witchcraft, the practice grew out of older European household traditions, where magic has woven into daily life through cooking, herbal remedies, protective charms, and the honoring of ancestors. This is the form of witchcraft I personally practice, so I approach it from a lived experience rather than a formal doctrine, by the way. Because of that, I see reincarnation in a flexible, intuitive way, a continuing cycle of experience and connection rather than a strict system with fixed rules or hierarchies. Traditional witchcraft, especially in Britain and European lines, sometimes teaches that souls return to the same family line or stay connected to the land, reflecting older beliefs about ancestry and place. Wicca, which emerged in the mid-20th century through the work of Gerald Gardner, introduced a more structured view, reincarnation in soul groups, learning and evolving together across lifetimes. This was influenced by Theosophy and Eastern philosophies, making Wicca's reincarnation model a modern synthesis rather than ancient teaching, right? We have also animistic folk traditions found all over the world. They treat the boundaries between humans, animals, and spirits as fluid. In these worldviews, life moves in cycles and forms shifts in ways that reflect the interconnectedness, is that a word? The interconnectiveness of everything. Reincarnation is less about who was I before and more about how life continues through transformation, nature, relationship. Modern New Age systems introduce extraterrestrial reincarnation, and these ideas have their own historical background. I talked about that in my Starset video. The modern New Age movement emerged in the late 19th, early 20th century, heavily influenced by Theosophy, a spiritual movement founded by Helena Blavatsky. Theosophy blended Hindu and Buddhist concepts with Western occult philosophy and added a cosmic layer, introducing ideas that soul evolved across planets and dimensions. And then this idea emerged with the UFO culture and channeling movements, creating the foundation of what we now recognize as starseed beliefs. These systems are not ancient religions, but modern spiritual synthesis. They pull from Eastern reincarnation models, Gnostic dualism, Western esoteric orders, science fiction aesthetics. So many people connect with these concepts symbolically, seeing them as metaphors for feeling different or spiritually displaced. Others take them literally and believe their soul originated in another star system. And some, unfortunately, use these ideas to create spiritual hierarchy, framing themselves as chosen or superior. And that's a dynamic I absolutely reject. I do not believe in the chosen one narrative or cosmic elitism. And before we return to the original question, I want to share something a bit more personal because it shaped my own view on reincarnation in a way no book or doctrine should. Over the past years, I've done the Brian Weiss past life regression session multiple times. It's a guided hypnotherapy approach developed by Dr. Brian Weiss. a psychiatrist who became well known for this work with patients who spontaneously called past life memories during his therapy sessions. What surprised me the most is that the lives I saw during these sessions were not the ones I expected, imagined. They were ordinary, sometimes difficult lives. I came out of those sessions with insight and emotional releases that didn't make sense as simple imaginations. This doesn't prove reincarnation, but it also explains why I personally lean towards believing in continuity of consciousness. I will link this video down below in the description so you can try it out yourself if you're open to it. Now that I've laid the groundwork, we can return to the original question and answer. Is the soul bound to one place? According to most traditions, no. Could a soul origin elsewhere in the universe? Well, traditional religions don't talk about planets. Gnosticism says the soul comes from a higher non-physical realm. New Age says yes, in a literal extraterrestrial way. My overview is that if consciousness isn't physical, it doesn't need to be limited to Earth. The universe is enormous and full of possibilities, but I prefer to stay grounded in the science we know today. While simple life is likely common in the universe, intelligent life is statistically rare and probably uninterested in humanity. So can humans reincarnate as animals and vice versa? Hinduism and Jainism say yes, Buddhism allows different form of rebirth, witchcraft varies, there is no single answer. Because reincarnation isn't a single belief system, it's a tapestry of perspectives that's developed across cultures, centuries. And my goal is just understanding those differences, to stay curious, to stay open rather than getting swept into harmful spiritual narratives that try to claim certainty where there is none. And now back to the question that started this whole video. Do we come back? If we do so, is consciousness bound to Earth or could it take form elsewhere? As this entire video, my answer is once again intentionally layered. I do believe consciousness continues. I don't see it as something that begins at birth and ends at death. And if consciousness is not physical, then I don't see a philosophical reason why it would be limited to one planet only. In principle, non-Earth embodiment is possible. At the same time, I consciously reject the idea of a fixed planet of origin identity. I don't believe that some people are secretly from elsewhere while others are not. And with the scientific probability added, while simple life in the universe is likely, intelligent life is rare, and there's no evidence that this is watching, guiding, or incarnating as humans. There's another piece that matters just as much to me. I don't think we are meant to fully remember past lives. If we did, it would make it harder, not easier, to live this one. Our relationships, responsibilities, grief, and love here on Earth require presence. Forgetting is not a flaw in the system, it's part of what allows us to engage deeply with this life rather than constantly orientating ourselves towards another one. This is also where the starseed idea can turn toxic, not because curiosity about consciousness is wrong, but because the moment a belief turns into an identity, I am from somewhere else, therefore I am different, special, or not fully part of this world, it starts pulling people away from their human lives instead of helping them inhabit them. When spiritual ideas are used to opt out of responsibility, relationship, or shared reality, they stop being supportive and start becoming a form of spiritual bypassing. I do understand why starseed narratives are appealing. Many people draw to them feel sensitive, displaced, deeply out of sync with the world. That makes sense. But if consciousness really is universal, then no one is a starseed because everyone is. And that means our task isn't to remember where we came from, but to show up fully where we are. One of my favorite spiritual teachers, Ramdas, framed reincarnation in exactly this way. He didn't see it as a cosmic hierarchy or a system of spiritual upgrades. He saw it as a slow evolution of consciousness unfolding across lifetimes as the ego softens. The soul takes on new forms the way we change clothes, not to escape life, but to keep learning how to love. What mattered to him wasn't who we might have been before or who we might be next, but the quality of awareness we bring to this moment. As he said, I am loving awareness. To me, this captures the heart of this entire conversation. Our deepest self isn't the story of our past lives or the idea of cosmic origin. It's the awareness that is here right now, meeting this life. So yes, I believe consciousness continues. I believe it may take forms we don't fully understand, but I don't believe the purpose of reincarnation is to make us less human. I think it exists to teach us how to be more fully human, here now on this earth. And if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for sitting with these questions with me. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree, disagree? Are you still undecided? I'm also sorry for butchering all the pronunciations at the beginning. Thank you so much for sharing space. Please leave a like and a sub if you want to support my work. Have a good one. Take care.